Simplicity 3012 and McCall's 8456. We're seeing tons of lounge sets out there, so I created my own by adding two patterns that are just out for this year. One is McCall's and one is Simplicity. I absolutely love them. This is so comfy, it's just unbelievable. So let's talk about the sweatshirt. The sweatshirt, I actually ran out of fabric, and it's a very heavy weight ponte roma from Mood. So I wanted to make something a little bit lighter, plus I didn't have enough fabric to do all of the hood. So I used just a little stretch bathing suit fabric on the inside. It adds just a little bit of pop of color on the hood. There is no pockets on either one of these, and I think I would put pockets either in the sweatshirt or the pants. But the sweatshirt detail is so interesting. It has this opening, like, so you can make the sweatshirt short, but this long version has this opening in the sleeve. So it's a 5-piece sleeve, which is probably the most, plus the cuff, so that makes 6. It's probably the most difficult part of this. So there's tons of top stitching everywhere, and I used a contrasting thread that has a little bit of sparkle in it, which you really can't see, the camera doesn't pick up, but there's tons of top stitching, and there's lots of opportunities for color blocking on this. I think it's super cute. I did shorten up the band. The band was twice as long on the top as it was in the pattern, partly because I ran out of fabric again, but it's okay because I'm short and I didn't want it so long that it was hanging down below. And then these pants are just amazing. They have 3 panels on the front and 3 panels on the back. I made a short set with them. I really like this pattern. So again, there's lots of top stitching going on, hard to see, but yeah, and they have a big wide waistband, so loving that. Okay, I am excited to get started on this Simplicity 3012 hoodie sweatshirt. I made a pair of pants out of McCall's 8456 to match it, and I used this really interesting thread. Let's see if you can see it against here. It's for top stitching. It just gives it a little bit of shine, but this is a ponte roma, so it's stretchy, so you want to use a knit needle when you're working with this in your machine. That will make your life so much easier. So the first thing we're going to do is sew the shoulder seams. We're going to sew piece 1 and piece 2 together. So here's piece 2. This is my back, and I put a pin on the right side of my fabric because this fabric is the same from both sides, and you've heard me say this before. This is piece 1, that you know, even though they look the same, sometimes when the light hits them after they're made up, they could be a little different, and we don't want that. We want to keep one side, whatever side we pick, as the right side. So we're going to sew the shoulder seams together, and then we're going to press them to the front, and we're going to run a bead of top stitching on them as it's functional but decorative. I mean, it will give it a little bit more substance with the extra stitching on there, but also decorative, which is why I showed you this thread, because I'm going to use this thread for all my top stitching, so the top stitching matches the top stitching on my pants. All right. So I'm going to sew these together, press them to the front, top stitch them. The next thing I'm going to do is sew my hood pieces together, and that is piece 3. And you need to cut 4 of these. Now, a couple of things. I ran out of fabric because I made those great big long pants and the sweatshirt. There's a lot of pieces. So, plus this is heavy, so I wanted something lighter. So this is my hood lining. It's a very stretchy, it's a swimsuit knit. So we're going to sew these pieces right side together along this big curve. And we're going to do it for both the hood and the hood lining. So my hood is already right sides together, my main hood. And I'm going to also pin that. And even though you cut them together and they're sitting together, you really want to pin them because you don't want one piece to end up being shorter than the other as it goes through your machine. So just a few pins. And after we sew the hood, we're also going to top stitch it. So we're going to sew the hood around this big section here. So here's my hood. Here's the top of the hood, right? We're going to sew this section, this big curvy section. Then we're going to press it towards the left, and we're also going to top stitch that. And you want to use your edge foot or you know, a guide, so you have this really nice top stitching going on. All right, here's our hood. We did our shoulder seams, but here's our hood. We're going to work on that right now. And you can see that I top stitched this going to the left side. And I also top stitched to the lining. I wanted to talk about pressing ham. You know, this ham comes in really handy for a lot of things, and especially for anything with a curve. So like this hood, because you need to get that seam pressed really nice in order to get a really good top stitching, this pressing ham comes in really handy. So now we want to sew our hood around the edge, right sides together. So I have the right side of my outside hood and the right side of my inside, funky, weird inside hood. And we're going to sew it along this leading edge. So I'm going to pin one edge, and I'm going to pin this seam up at the center of the hood. And then pin all the way around. All right, that's all pinned. So I have the two right sides of my hood pinned together all along this outside edge. And after I stitch that, I'm going to understitch it because I want to keep especially since this lining is so different, I want to keep it from rolling into my hood. All right, here's our hood all sewn together. So I sewed the right sides together of the hood, and then I understitched the lining. What I did was I stitched the lining to the seam allowance, and you can see that row of stitching there. And what that does is it helps to force the lining to stay on the inside so it doesn't roll around. This hasn't been pressed, and you can see it still gives it a nice ridge. Once it's pressed, it will be even better. So isn't this fabric fun? I used it for a swimsuit project, and you know, keeping scraps sometimes makes all the difference in the world, because this is just going to make a fun inside for my hood, right? You see that hanging out from the back of the sweatshirt? That's just kind of a fun pop of color because this sweatshirt is very, very gray. Now, one thing about this pattern, because I'm using a different top stitching thread, I'm changing my thread a lot, and now I'm going to change my needle in addition to changing my thread. So after I press this and make sure this is really nice, I'm going to go around and just baste within the seam allowance this bottom edge here to make it one piece. So it'll just be easier to manipulate when I have to sew it onto the sweatshirt top. So I'm going to just stitch. So your seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. You're going to stitch inside the seam allowance, 3/8 of an inch or something. You don't want to see it when you're done. You don't want to have to go back and pull it out. So I'm just going to run a bead of stitching all the way around, putting these together so they're one unit. And then I am also going to do, this will be inside. Right, I'm going to do 2 rows of top stitching. So I'm going to use a twin needle, and I will link in the description down below the video that shows you how to use a twin needle. But if you don't have a twin needle, you can do 2 rows of stitching. You have to be really, really precise in order to get it to look like a twin needle. So I suggest you use a twin needle. It's not that hard, but again, you have to change your needle and changing thread but that's what you're gonna get for a more elevated look, is when you do these kind of details and take your time and make sure that they're done correctly. Because you can see, just here's my shoulder seam, and I top stitched it. You can just see, you know, the thread has a little bit of sparkle to it, so it kind of elevates this very plain gray sweatshirt into something more than just a gray hoodie. So I'm going to baste my bottom seam and do my press it and do my top stitching. All right, here's our hood. Looks great. Love the lining. Absolutely so much fun. My understitching, you can see that right close to the edge, and then twin needle stitched. So I have a little bit of design there. Quick about twin needles. So I used this fancy thread. I wasn't going to buy 2 spools of it. So in order to make a twin needle, I just wound some around a bobbin. So that gives me the extra spool that I need for the top. And these are 2 twin needles, different sizes. They come in different widths, and it has just 1 shank. So it just goes in where your regular needle goes. But again, I will link it in the bottom. So now we're going to attach our hood. You want to lap on the outside. It says to lap the left over the right, and where the dots are, you can baste this together. I'm just gonna put a pin in there because sometimes I change the width. Like on these shoulders, I only did a 1/2 inch seam allowance instead of 5/8. So I wanna make sure that it fits correctly. And I'm gonna attach it to the hood, so I'm going to attach the right sides together. And the first thing I wanna do is I wanna find my center front and my center back. So I'm going to mark up my shoulder seams and put a pin in the center of my back, and then mark up my shoulder seams again and put a pin in the center front. So that way I know where it's gonna go and how everything is going to be balanced. Especially if you're changing these seam allowances a little bit, you wanna make sure that everything goes the right way. So if you lay your hood down the way it's supposed to go, right? This is going to go on like this. So now I know, because this is the right side up, the right side of my shirt, everything's the right side up. So I'm going to attach it to my neckline. And I'm going to start with my center back and attach this seam on the hood to the pin I just put in the center back. And these are the kind of times that you might want to baste something if you're a little nervous about it. I'm just going to walk this around a little bit, see how it fits. All right, so far that looks pretty good. I just need to get this last bit, and I want to make sure that it's centered on my center front mark here. I'm going to unpin that cross that I did. I'm going to take one side and lap it over. This is my left side. And then I'm going to take my right side and lap it back over across. But what I'm really concerned about is the other side, that this is in the center, that this cross piece is crossing over in the center. So this right here, where this little V is, that's where the center of my front should be. So let's see how we did. I just want to check it. So I'm going to fold my front in half just to get an idea where the center front is. That looks pretty good. I'm not 100% sure, so I'm going to baste that area so I can look at it with all the pins out, and then I can make sure that that's correct. After I've sewn that on and I'm happy with the way the hood looks, I'm going to top stitch the seam allowance of the hood down to the sweatshirt. So I'm going to stitch it on the sweatshirt side. We are so making progress. Our hood is on. It looks terrific. It's kind of a long hood, but it goes way high up on your neckline. Make sure that you finish the inside seam here, because you're going to see that. I used an overlocker, but if you don't have an overlocker, at least zigzag it so it's not fraying. And then I stitched it down with the straight stitch using my contrasting thread. You could do a twin needle here if you were worried about this getting too stretchy going over your head. A twin needle would work. It would have to be a tight twin needle, something really close together, because you have a kind of a small seam allowance there, and you don't want one needle going through like 5 layers of fabric and one only going through 1 layer of fabric. That won't work. The needles, the stitches will skip. So yes, hood finished. And I'm doing version B for the sleeves, which is the longer sleeve with this little cutout here. So we're doing this piece. So these are quite involved, and we're gonna go step by step through each sleeve. So the first step, and if you're following along in the pattern, because we're doing the sleeve B, the first piece step is step 15, and we're going to take piece 4. Oops, just lost piece 4. We're going to take piece 4 and piece 5, and we're going to sew them together. And you can see that there's corresponding notches here. We're going to sew these pieces together at this seam. So that's the very first step. I'm going to pin mine together. Right sides together. And then after you do that, you're going to press the seam towards the cap, which is this rounded one, piece 4. So you're going to press the seam up that way and top stitch it. And it's going to look like this. So now I have, here's piece 4, here's piece 5. I've pressed it towards the sleeve cap and I've top stitched it. And then I've pressed under 1.25 inches. I actually finished mine and then top stitched the hem. So that's piece 4 and 5 together. Then we take piece 8, which is this piece, and we're going to fold under 1.25 inches, again, finish the edge and top stitch that at 1 inch so it looks like this. And this is going to go together. This is our sleeve. So this creates that opening that we see in the sleeve right here. Really cute. Now, on piece 8 and piece 5, there are these dots. And you're going to match them up here on the sides and just kind of baste these pieces together, just so they become one unit of the sleeve. So now you have this really interesting sleeve that has this finished opening. So this is going to be at my elbow. It's going to look something like that at my elbow. Huh? Very cool. All right. Now, and you're going to attach sleeve piece 9 and sleeve piece 10. And if we did everything right, look at that. They're the same length. That is really important. So I want to find the right side. Yes. So this is going to get attached like this, and then piece 10. Nope. Piece 10, here we go. The right side of piece 10 is going to get attached like that, and we have actually made our sleeve unit. You can see this is the top of the sleeve. So this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, a 5-piece sleeve. That's a first for me. I have not done a 5-piece sleeve before, but once both of these sleeve assemblies are finished, we're going to sew them flat into the top. So yeah, there's a little bit of work left to be done. When you sew these seams on, there's top stitching. Once again, it looks like, let's see, stitch sleeve front, assemble matching dots. There was a press towards front and back. So the seams are pressed outward, and the top stitching is done on these side sleeve pieces. So we'll take a look at this when we come back, but this is a pretty intricate and interesting sleeve. You're not gonna see this on ready to wear at Target. You may see it on ready to wear at Nordstrom's, and that's the goal. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for high-end ready to wear, and this pattern seems to be delivering that. So I'm pretty excited to see how this sleeve comes out. As we move forward with the sleeve, I made my split piece. I put the top over the bottom, so it goes this way, right? And then added my side seams. I also only used a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so I have these little knobbies here instead of a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I prefer a 1/2 inch, like a bigger sleeve. So, you know, not usually I don't trim away excess, but this is an opportunity where you can just trim that away to make it look perfect. Then you want to take care to find the notch in the center. So this is piece 4, right? This top piece here. You want to know where that dot is, because that is the center of your sleeve, and it is going to match up on your shoulder seam on your top. So here is my sweatshirt. And this is the arm opening, and this is right side up. And I'm gonna lay my sleeve right side up, and then this is the center mark. So this mark is going to go on my seam allowance. So I'm gonna flip my sleeve over so it's right sides together with my sweatshirt, and I'm going to pin it from the sweatshirt side because the sleeve is a little bit bigger. You know, we have this very soft convex and very soft concave seam going on. So I want the feed dogs to help with the sleeve. So I'm gonna flip everything over now that it's pinned together. And I like to pin one edge of the underarm. And then I'm just gonna, this is we're putting in a flat sleeve, and it's great because it just goes in very easily. Look at that. I mean, you just wanna make sure the edges match. Because it's knit, you can do this. And I'll do the other side, same thing. Whoop. And you know, this is a time that if you are nervous about putting the sleeve in, baste it. You know, I mean, I used the seam ripper only once so far on this garment, and so that makes me pretty happy. And it was on some of the top stitching, which was really annoying because it's a metallic thread. All right, so you have something that looks like this. Here's my sleeve, right here is my garment, and I'm going to stitch this seam. All right. After I've stitched it, I press it, and look, this is the best time to press stuff. It's flat, it's open, and honestly my pressing ham has gotten an awful lot of work today. But I've pressed it flat, stitched it, pressed it flat, finished it, and then you top stitch it again. So you top stitch the seam allowance to the sweatshirt so it goes away from the sleeve. But what you end up with is this really nice sleeve. I mean, that looks beautiful. With the top stitching on this, really, it makes a difference. And this would be really cute for color blocking. It would make an adorable color blocked sweatshirt. So the next step is to sew up the sleeve and the side seam. So you're gonna turn them right sides together. Line up your underarm seam. Line up the bottom of the sleeve. We're gonna put a cuff on this. And then line up the edges. Everything should go together really well. And then also down the side. And then there'll be a band at the bottom here on this also. So we'll stitch up that seam. And then we just have to put the bands on. Really cute. Like it a lot. I am loving this sweatshirt. It is so cute. I have tried it on a couple of times. I'm sure you have too if you've made this. One thing about doing these seams, this one continuous seam up the arm, you want to watch that underarm seam. That's pretty good. I'm happy with that. And yeah, this is great. I'm loving it. So everything is finished except the cuffs and the hemband. So we're going to work on the cuffs first, and we're going to take piece 11 and we're going to fold it the long way. So here's piece 11. We're going to match these up, right? We're going to fold it the long way. Right sides together. And we're going to stitch that seam. So we end up with a tube that looks like this. We're going to fold the tube in on itself, so it's going to be wrong sides together. This is such a great way to finish off an edge because you sew the seam in, essentially you're done. I overlocked my seam, so my seam is all going to go to the same direction. If you didn't, you can press it open, so one goes to one way, one goes to the other. And I'm just going to pin it around the edge. Now you can run this through the baste if you want to keep this all as one unit. It makes it a little bit easier to sew, but I'm going to be okay with it just like this. So here's my sleeve. I'm going to match up the seam on my cuff to the inside seam on my sleeve. So that's the way it's going to look when it's finished. All right. And I want to find the center front of my sleeve. So I'm going to fold my sleeve at the seam line, and I'm going to find the center front and put a pin there. Same thing with my cuff. I'm going to fold it at the seam line and put a pin there at the center front. So I'm balancing the cuff between the front and the back. I'm going to put this pin going the other way so I know. There we go. Okay. So now this is the way my cuff is going to look when it's finished, right? I have my underarm seam and the seam on the cuff, and I'm going to roll the cuff over my sleeve. I'm going to take that pin that I put in to match my center front. I'm going to pin those together. And I'm going to pin my cuff at the underarm seam and the cuff seam, making sure that I have 3 layers here because I have 2 layers for the cuff and then 1 layer for the sleeve. Now the cuff is going to be a bit smaller than the sleeve. We need to fit that sleeve into the cuff, right? So we're going to stretch it as we go along, essentially. You're going to stretch the cuff as you go along to fit the sleeve. The other thing is, when you sew this, if you have an arm on your machine, if you can slide this into your machine, put the sleeve down below, because that will help suck up some of that sleeve in the feed dogs. So this takes a little bit of wiggling and manipulating. I would baste it if you're at all nervous, baste it first, but you definitely want to use your stretch stitch for this cuff seam. I've used my stretch stitch sparingly. I used it putting the sleeves in, I used it on the side seams, and I used it to put the neckline in. But most of this stuff on the sleeve detail, I didn't bother using a stretch stitch. So we're going to do that to both. The second row of stitching in there, either overlocking or a second row of stitching, and then turn the seam up into the sleeve. And it suggests top stitching. I think I'm going to pass on the top stitching on the sleeve, but certainly you can if you want to add more top stitching. All right, sewing those cuffs on was a little bit of a challenge. They were too small to fit over the aperture in my sewing machine, so I had to do it on top of the machine. Got stuck a couple of times, but well worth it. Now the cuff is on, and I have overlocked it. The sweatshirt is really cute. That was probably one of the most challenging parts of the sweatshirt, was sewing that. But sleeves are finished, and the cuff looks terrific. All right, so this really nice long cuff. It's matched up here with the seams. Looks great. So the last thing to do is the hemband. And if you've been hanging out sewing with me for a while, you know that I tend to run out of fabric. And I did again on this one. Obviously, because I used this lining for the hood, but I only had enough fabric to cut one piece of piece 12, which is the lower band. And you should cut 2 pieces wide like this, so you can make a nice wide hemband. My options were to use a different color or to cut it in half. So my hemband is half as wide as what is shown on the pattern, which is fine with me because they didn't shorten it. So I'm all right with a shorter band. And this goes on exactly the same way as we do the cuffs. You take those 2 pieces and you sew the ends together. I'm going to find my center front and center back, and these pieces are the same. Right. The front and the back pieces. And then this band, just the way the wrist band was done, folds in on itself. I'm gonna throw a few pins in there. So you can see that my band is like 2.5 inches, and I'll just do a really skinny seam with that. Maybe 3/8 of an inch. So we'll end up with a hemband that's a little more than 2 inches. And I'm okay with that. That's fine. But I finished folding that in half, and I'm going to find the quadrants on the sweatshirt the same way. I'm going to match up the side seams and find the center back and the center front. Then I'm just going to match up those quadrants and sew them, just so the hemband on in the same way that we sewed on the wristbands, right? This is the way the hemband is going to go on. I'm going to match up the side seams and the quadrants, right? Flip this over all the way around and stitch it on. And then go back and stitch it again or serge it. And you have the option to overlock it if you would like. But I'm just going to match up these quadrants, and then I'll be good to stitch this. And then our sweatshirt is completed. And I can see myself making more of these. I really like the fit of it. Now I made a medium because it is a unisex sweatshirt. So, you know, it's broad. The shoulders are broad because it's made to also fit a man's body. And I'm happy with the medium. I think that if you wanted something super loose, like this is a little close. If you wanted something super, super loose, you could go with, you know, a size up a little and have this like super oversized baggy sweatshirt. I was looking for something a little bit more structured. But yeah, so I'm just going to pin that around, and you can see that the waistband, the hemband is smaller than the bottom of my sweatshirt. So I'm just going to pin that so it fits and put that at the bottom of the feed dogs and suck it up. All right, let's see how it looks.